All right, guys, welcome back to episode number 4 of Compliance in the Cloud. In this episode, we're going to be creating or provisioning users so that I can show you guys not only how to take care of some of the compliance needs that we have with the framework that we're using, being CIS, but also, so if you guys are looking to get into a cloud engineering DevOps capacity, you can also see the methodology behind how we actually programmatically create users using infrastructure as code. It's really ambiguous when people kind of say these kinds of things in general terms. So I really want to show you guys the methodology behind not only creating the users, but what kind of permissions to attach to the users specifically in AWS. If you remember with what we were looking at before for the actual AWS CIS Foundations benchmark, and I'll put it on the screen here. Sorry, there's an Amazon guy outside, but 1.1 is avoid the use of the root account, right? So what I'm using right now is the root account, which is not good. What we want to do is we want to provision ourselves a user so that we can log in with that user and not be, creating things with the actual root account of your AWS account. You don't want to use the root account because it has permissions to everything in your AWS account. Or I'm going to start saying root user to not confuse you guys with AWS account and root account. So you don't want to use your root user because it has permissions to everything in your AWS account, meaning if someone compromises that specific user, they can do anything they want in your account. They have access to your billing information, credit card, all your servers, anything you can think of, they have access to. They have access to close your account, all those kinds of things. So it's not only important to have a complex password like we showed in the last video with creating our IAM user policy password, but you also want to not use the root account on a daily basis. I'm not saying there's no utility whatsoever to using the root account. For example, if you want to do some sort of support through AWS, or you want to, look at your billing, or you want to update your credit card information, then you have to use the root account. But what you normally want to do when you're provisioning users, especially using infrastructure as code, is you want to provision yourself a new user so you don't have to use the root user. Now, enough about the root user. I know that was probably pretty confusing, but if we look at our code baseline here with what we have already, we want to be able to cover a few specific rules within the AWS CIS framework that's going to help us be in compliance with that actual framework. So what I mean by that is, if you come here, rule 1.1 is avoid the use of the root account, like I said. But then we have 1.16, which is ensure IAM policies are attached only to groups or roles. Now, we're not going to be doing that today in this video, but what we are going to be doing is gaining some visibility into the exact roles and permissions and groups that we're making in our actual account. And one of the ways to do this is to use infrastructure as code, so you know exactly what's in your account. You can not only look at it in the actual AWS account itself, but you can also look at it in your code base. So if I'm going to do this right here, in the last video, I showed you guys all the stuff that you're going to be seeing here. So if you haven't checked that out, definitely I'll put a card up top, and also check out the GitHub repo where I'm actually storing all this code. But if I actually want to provision users, I'm going to want to make a new stack in my CDK application. Now, how I'm going to do that is I'm actually going to create a new stack in my lib folder here. So if I cd into my lib folder, I can create a stack called, and I'll do code. Let me make sure this is big enough here. Code cloud compliance CIS user stack .typescript. And I'm essentially going to copy and paste the exact class declaration up here from the other one, and I'm just going to change a few things about it. One thing that you'll notice when you're actually writing infrastructure as code or code in general, you want to reuse and be able to copy as much code as possible. I know it seems really cool in the beginning to actually just continually write code, but trust me, if you can copy paste code, please do that because it's going to pay off in the long run. So I'm actually going to copy in all the imports that I have here, and I can delete them as necessary. And then I'm actually going to copy in the cloud compliance class here, and then just put some squiggly brackets to close it off. Now I'm going to need to change the actual class I'm exporting because it's different, obviously. So for this, I'm going to do, cloud compliance user stack, and I like to keep it all uppercase. Now in order to actually use this stack in our application, we're going to have to go to the bin folder of that actual stack, and we're going to create the new stack here. So what we have, first we have to import it. So what we have is the cloud compliance user, user baseline stack, and then we'll do the path that it's coming from. So we have lib cloud compliance. I have to traverse my directories a little differently. There we go. And let's make sure this lines up. So let's just copy that stack directly in there. And then let's close it off like this. I think I actually spelled that incorrectly. Okay, there we go. Now we have to pass it the exact same properties that we did in the stack above it. And again, if you guys are looking for what I did there exactly, because I copied and pasted a few bits of code, and I don't really like to leave it that ambiguously, but I went into the new stack that I created, or the new file that I created within my lib folder, which houses all my stacks. It can house other things, obviously, but it houses the stacks here. Then what I did is I took my exported class that I have above, and then I just imported it directly in here. And now I'm going to create a new stack in the actual bin folder. So much like the one above it, and you can kind of use that for reference, I'm going to add the friendly name of that and then put some property brackets and close it off. So right now, this should actually be a newly created stack. I think if I did a CDK list, you'd be able to see that I now have 2 stacks instead of the 1. Different directory. CDK list. Remember, CDK list helps you list out the stacks that you're using and kind of gives you an idea of what kind of code you're working with. Okay, perfect. So now I not only have the Cloud Compliance CIS baseline stack, but I also have the Cloud Compliance user stack, and that's what we're going to be deploying with today. So I want to actually do a few things in the beginning. When I'm provisioning users, I want to first obviously create the user, and I'm going to have to import the IAM user library above. I imported the entire thing, but you can also import specific things out of it, like specific functions like user or group. I imported the whole thing. So if you are at home or actually using this to create your first user that you're going to now use on a daily basis, so we don't use the root user, what you're going to want to do is, and I'll just call this the CIS user in my variable, we're going to CIS user equals new, IAM, because we're calling that library, .user, and then we're going to pass it some specific properties such as the constructor with this, and then let's capitalize CIS user because that's what's actually going to show up in the console and you want to capitalize it. And we're going to pass it a username because that's one of the properties that it needs. I'm just going to reinforce that. And again, you can pass it the one that we were doing before where it's saying generate if need be. I don't see the need in that because IAM is not something that's really fidgety in terms of that. Now for the password, this is where something's going to come in that we kind of need to discuss. So when you're creating a user for someone else, you're obviously going to have to create a temporary password and then send them that temporary password so that they, go to log in and they change it once they log in. I fully recommend that you put all of this stuff in a .env folder if you're going to be using it long term. And actually, let me show you guys that right now. So in order to follow best practices here, what I want to do is I want to actually add a .env file in the root directory of my project. And I was kind of contemplating doing this on stream. It's not really necessary because these are temporary passwords, but also I am pushing this code to a public repository that you guys can use. So I kind of want to show best practices in doing this. They are temporary passwords, but if I push this code, I'm obviously going to change the password right after this video. But if you guys were to push this code, I don't want to show you guys a bad practice in terms of that. So for example, if you push this code to a public repository and then that person technically doesn't log in, someone could see that hashed value, such as in plain text. If I was to make a plain text password like this is the password. Someone can actually see that in a repository, and if that user hasn't logged in yet, they're going to grab that user or that password and try to log in and maybe compromise your accounts. So first what we're going to need is the .env package from npm. We're actually going to just grab that and do an npm install .env like you see there. And then from there, what we're going to do is we actually have to not only require the config, but we have to require it right above here. So what we're doing is we're requiring a .env config, and what it's going to do is look for a .env folder or file, excuse me, and it's going to grab certain values out of there. So for example, if I want to create a value called, CIS user password in my .env file, and dot stands for it's a hidden file. So if I was to do an ls in my project directory, you're not going to see it, right? There's no .env, but if I was to lsla, you are going to see it right there. Now that's very useful because if you're using production grade servers or something like that, you can actually put specific permissions on hidden files so that only people that should have permission to see those files can see those files. So that's one thing to go over in the future. But if I want to create the CIS user password, what I would do is I would actually specify a variable, kind of. Don't think of it like a variable, it's just a .env file. But what I would do is I would specify in all caps CIS, let's put some underscores here too, CIS user password, and then I would add a specific value that complies with our actual IAM user policy. Remember, we created that in the video before this, so we're actually going to have to comply with that when we create passwords here. So what I'm going to do, and again, this is going to be changed after the video comes out, so please don't try to type this in. This is just for educational purposes. I'm going to create a value of test password because it needs a capital letter, 12345, %, money sign, because I need a symbol, and I also need it over 14 characters. So if I want to actually use this in my stack, what I now need to do is I need to actually take that and create what's called a read-only variable. Now, you don't need to do this if you're using Python, but for me, I like to do certain things like this because, no one needs to actually change this in my, in my actual class. No one other than me needs to change this variable, so it's best practice to use this, right? So a private read-only variable, like I'm going to declare here in TypeScript, is essentially one that can't be modified outside of the class, but can be viewed outside of the class. So that's very important. They can't change this data structure whatsoever. Only I would be able to in the actual class that I've declared it in. So now that we're actually taking in our actual secret value from our .env or our .env value, what we want to do is after we've actually created the private variable up top, and again, I'm declaring the, type, and I'm also specifying some other syntax here, but you could as easily just create in Python, CIS user password equals process.env same thing, and it'll come up. So now that we actually have done that, we want to pass it to the password of our actual properties that we have here. So if we do that, since it's a constructor, or since it's a instance of the class that I'm in, as you see here, it's inside the instance of the class. What you want to do is you want to type this dot CIS user password. Now that's going to be all we need to actually set the beginning password or the temporary password that we can then send to that user so they can log in. And if you forget, it's right here. So now we have to move on and pass it a property called password reset required. And what that's going to do is once that password that we have in our .env is used by the user we're sending that actual password to, it's going to require it to be immediately reset so that the person can't actually keep their password as test password 12345 because that's utter insanity, okay? So now that that's over, what we need to do now is we actually want to create another user. And the only reason we're going to do this is so I can kind of show you guys how you can add different users to different groups. So if we follow the same thing, we could do test user equals new im.user, pass it the constructor of this, and then test user, and then let's pass it the same properties. So let's say username is, let me get that out of the way for you guys. Test user. Sorry, Mia's like literally rolling around on the ground right now. I'll show you guys in one of my Instagram posts what she's doing. Then we're going to pass it a password of secret value dot plain text. And let's say this dot test user password. Now, we have to do the same exact thing that we just did with the other user before with this user. So let's grab another password here. And I'm just making these passwords up, by the way. So let's do test user password equals string, and let's pass it that. Now let's copy the actual variable or declaration, and let's create another private read-only variable called test user password, camel case it. Let's declare the type of string, even though we don't have to if you're on Python or something else. Even though Python, for some reason, has gotten really big into using type annotation, which is so backwards to what they actually tried to appeal to in users beforehand. But that's a video for another day. Keep an eye out for the podcast. And then let's actually pass it the test user password and put an exclamation mark to signify that this value is not null. So one thing, if you are actually using TypeScript, the reason why I put the exclamation mark on the back, it's because if I don't, this will actually error out, because what it's doing is this is a string value, but it's passing it to a value that's undefined. So TypeScript doesn't like that. It's going to try to type annotate that, and it's going to error out. So what you want to do is, and also what it's doing is, if it's undefined, it kind of assumes that the value is null. So what you want to do is pass an exclamation mark. So it's saying, you know, trust me, this value is not null. Not sure if that's the best way around it, but that's the way that I found to be most useful. All right, now, since we have our, I have to also require a password to be reset there. Now, I'm not actually going to be signing in with this user like I am with the other one. I just created it to show you how to add different users to different groups using infrastructure as code. But now we actually have to create those groups. Now, the groups are going to be what holds the actual permissions and policies that we then attach users to. Like I said before, rule set in CIS compliance number 1.16 says that we can't attach policies directly to users because that's bad practice. So what we do is we create a group, attach a policy to that group, then attach those users, or invite those users into that actual group. That takes care of that for us. So what we want to do is we want to create two groups. I'm going to create an admin group. So you have admin permissions to the user that you're going to be using on a daily basis. That's going to essentially be taking over for the root user that you're not supposed to use. And then I'm going to add some basic audit group or something like that just for a proof of concept. So if I add the admin group here, we'll just declare the admin group variable. We'll say new group. Then we'll actually pass it the constructor of this, and we'll say admin group. And then we're going to pass it some properties such as a manage policy. Now, a manage policy, you can go into the actual GUI here, and you could see exactly what all the managed policies are. So for example, if I come in here and I go to policies, there's a whole plethora or a list of policies that you see here, and these are technically the managed policies. So when you add them in your actual code, they're going to look very similar to how they look here. For example, administrator, administrator access right here. See how it's annotated in that way? Now, the way that we're going to add that to the actual code is going to be the same exact way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a list or an array, and I'm going to say manage policies, and then I'm going to have an array, and then manage policy from AWS manage policy, and this is all in the IAM user npm package that you're using already. And then I'm going to actually pass it the string of what you just saw right there. So I can actually copy and paste it directly out of the console, and I can add it right there. So now anyone that is attached to this admin group is going to have administrator privileges. So be sparingly with how you actually attach those. Now I want to create another group called the audit group, and this could be used for anything from auditors, not to be redundant, that come in to try to analyze your account, to people that you just want to have read-only access, so they want to be able to see everything in your account, but you don't want them to actually be able to touch anything, because that could be kind of detrimental to the security of your account. So let's create a new group. Let's pass it the same properties that we had before, such as audit group in capitals. And then let's create another manage policies array. And the reason we create an array is because we can add actual other managed policies in this array. If we just put a comma and then say IAM.manage policy, we can add more permissions to that array. We don't specifically need to in this case because we gave it administrator privileges, but just keep that in mind because it's a useful way of not having to rewrite your code over and over again. Just pass it as an array, and then you can pass in new managed policies. You can also grab a list of managed policies and then just say for each in the managed policy list, add to group whatever, but that's kind of more advanced stuff that we'll be doing in the future. So in the managed policies array, what I'm going to do is add managed policy. Then I'm going to say from AWS managed policy name, and then I'm going to add the read-only access managed policy. Now, if you were to go into the console again, you'll see that there's a read-only access managed policy, and you can add it directly here. Now to top all this off before we actually deploy our stacks and get all these users in our account, as you can see, we don't have these users right away. If I go back to my users here, all I have is these 3 users here, nothing in that, category of what we're creating. All I have to do now is I have to actually add those users to the groups that I created for them. And it's very, very easy to do this. So if I want to do the admin group, then I'll do that, admin group.add user. And then I'll specify the variable of the user that I had. So for this one, I want to add the CIS user because that's going to be the user we're going to be using going forward to the admin group. Now, if I want to add another user to another group, say the audit group, I'll do audit group.add user, and then I'll actually pass in the test user that we just created. So that should be completely done. We can actually do a CDK list to see if at a high level our code is going to run here. And if it does, let's get ready to deploy. Perfect. So let's grab that stack name. Let's do a CDK deploy. Let's pass it the cloud compliance user stack. And once this is deployed, I'll see you guys back in a minute. While this is deploying, I actually want to take you guys through why this is very useful. And as you can see here, our stack was deployed. I have the stack arm if I want to go in my CloudFormation stacks like I was talking about before and actually see the, resources I spun up. But if we actually go to our AWS Management Console, what we'll see here is our 2 users that we had. So they're now a part of the admin group, and their permissions are administrator access like we wanted it to be. And then if we go to the other user, the test user, they're now part of the audit group, and their permissions are only read-only access. So it may look like we attach policies directly to those users, but we didn't. We attached the user actually to the group, and now we're in compliance with CIS. It's very basic in terms of what this looks like right now, and this is what I wanted to bring up. It looks very basic in terms of what we're actually looking at right now, but I promise you at scale, you're going to want to use and build something out like this. There's a lot of other things for user management that you can use, such as like queue and YAML files and things like that. I personally like the CDK because say I go to add new users, I essentially can just create a new user like I did here and add it to a group that's pre-existing. And if anyone ever asks me, what kind of permissions does that user have, I can come directly into my code base as well as into my AWS console, and I can create lambdas and things like that that try to match the 2 permissions together, thus maintaining a system of inventory of all my users and, the permissions that they have. It's a way to double check yourself, and it's also an easy way to actually deploy the users that you have. So now that we have this user created, the CIS user, what you're going to want to do, and you should have this down already, but you're going to want to go to the little caret up here and copy your account. Because right now, like I said, I'm logged in as the root user, and I want to stop doing that. Because technically, my CIS user has almost all the same permissions that my root user would have. It just doesn't have access to the billing and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the preventative nature of what's going on here. So if I log out of my account, first I'm going to copy the account ID that I just showed you right there. Now you can sign out, right? So if I come to sign back in, now I go in to sign in as an IAM user, right? Instead of being a root user, I go in as an IAM user. I paste that account ID right there. And I take my username, which is the CIS user. And now for password, it's going to be exactly what we had it as before. So if you are not signed in, you can come to your .env. Again, this is not what this is used for, but this can circumvent it a bit. And you're going to want to actually add your password directly in there. Now, if I go to sign in, what it's going to do is it's going to prompt me to state my old password. And now I'm going to create a brand new password that hopefully complies with all of the password policies that I had before. And boom, I'm signed in. I can do everything that I did before. I can probably create users in here. I can do everything that the root user was doing before. And I'm not violating Rule 1.1 of the CIS framework, nor am I violating Rule 1.16 of the CIS framework. And if we're using something like Security Hub that's going to alert us when someone does violate those rules, you're going to be completely compliant in that way. Now, one thing I want to show you guys before we end the video is when you're using a .env file to actually create your users. And once again, this password is no longer the right password. And if I wanted to sign in with the other one, I would use that password. But I'm not going to do that right now. It will be changed by the time this video is out. Do not try to hack my AWS account. Actually, go for it. Try to hack it. What you want to do is you want to create something called a dot. If you're going to push your code to GitHub and you have a .env file in your actual IDE or in your text editor or in your folder, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have a file called a gitignore, and you would do it by adding it directly how it shows there. So I already have one, but if you were to add it, you would do code.gitignore. Make sure it's a secret file with a dot. And then what you want to do is you want to add your .env file in there. And what that's going to do is make sure that when you go to push your code, which I'm going to do right now, I'm going to say Ep.4 commit. So if you guys want to go check out the code that was from this episode, definitely go check out the GitHub. It'll be in the description below. But now when I go to push my code, I'm not going to actually be pushing the contents of the .env file. This makes it secure. So if you're using the same temporary passwords for your own personal account, as long as you do this, no one will be able to see it on your public GitHub at least. I'm not saying to store your passwords in plain text. That's not at all what I'm saying. But if you're going to be pushing your code to a public GitHub repository, I know that this is not what this video is about. Make sure you have a gitignore. Make sure you're putting your .env file in your gitignore. And when I go to push this code, plastic, I'm not signing my commits, sorry. We can come to the actual repo, as I'll show you here. And boom. So here's the new repo. You'll see my commit, Ep.4 commit, which is this episode. Again, check it out in the description below if you want to check out my repo and any other code that I'm writing. Feel free to add anything or, send me a pull request if you find something that I should change. But as you see here, there is no .env file in there. There's only our new stack that we just created, and all is well. No passwords in plain text. All right, so I really hope you guys appreciated all the things that we went over in episode number 4. Again, a much longer video than what we're kind of used to, but I really like this long form content, and I really like the technical content that I've been putting out lately. I hope you guys do as well. Definitely leave me a comment in the description below if you do or you don't. Feedback is always appreciated. Definitely follow me on my Twitter in the description below, or join the Discord like it says on the actual whiteboard behind you. It says post questions in the Discord. I really appreciate when you guys send me questions. It's honestly awesome. I will say that the medium that you reach out to me with, such as if you reach out to me on Instagram, I'm not going to be able to respond in the way that you might want me to because I can't post code snippets. I can't, type on my keyboard. I'd never have Instagram up on my computer. So if you want to follow me on Instagram, definitely do that. But if you really want a long-winded question or a long-winded answer to a question that you have, definitely reach out to me in the Discord. And as always, other people will be in the Discord to help provide you other concepts and, other points of view that aren't just mine. I don't think I'm totally correct on all this stuff. I learned it just like you guys are learning it right now. This is all just for educational purposes. So if you have any feedback, like I said, leave it in the comments, bring it in the Discord, reach out to me on Twitter, anything like that. I appreciate you guys. I'll see you in episode number 5 in a little bit. And I promise I did not forget the code, the full stack course that I was going to put out. That's going to be out by the end of the week. I have a wedding to go to, but I promise it'll be out. So you guys take care. I'll see you in the next video.